Biblical Monsters by Hoarse Voice. Chapter 1. On December 14th, at 3:15 AM, Adams woke me with a loud knock on my front door. "Put your boots on," he said when I answered. "There's a biblical monster in my house." I said nothing, but did as he asked. If any part of my mind comprehended the ramifications of what he had said, it assumed I had misheard. I knew better than to drag my feet when Adams gave me an order, but took a few seconds to grab a raincoat before following him. By the time I had closed the door behind me, Adams had already marched halfway back to his house. As I hurried after, bracing against the blowing rain, I peripherally glimpsed the blinking points of the 7km and 10km beacons in the distance. Besides them, and the lights from our station's buildings, the universe was solid black. When I reached his house's foyer, Adams gestured towards the living room. "It's in there," he said. "Keep an eye on it. I'll be back when my weather report is done." He edged past me, and, heedless of the storm, began marching towards the building that housed the generators and radio equipment. I hung up my coat and shuffled to the large open space that was 1/3 kitchen and 2/3 living room. Still foggy-brained, I did not at first comprehend the pastel shape that lay sprawled on Adam's couch, unmoving except for rapid, shallow breaths. His use of the phrase biblical monster had been deliberate. If he had called our visitor a unicorn, he might not have reminded me of how wrong I was regarding certain touchy subjects we had sometimes debated. But he had kept his tone neutral. Perhaps he had not used that particular phrase to avoid giving me incorrect information. I considered myself well read, but was not aware of any mythology involving unicorns with wings. The creature's shape consisted almost entirely of smooth curves. With some imagination, the legs, neck, and torso might resemble those of a horse or deer, but this was only for lack of anything else to compare them with. None of the proportions matched those of either animal. It had a smaller torso and pelvis, supported by short, stocky legs, and an unobtrusive solid hoof at the end of each. A pattern of stars, one large and 5 small, had been dyed in the hair on its flank. I suspected the 6 stars, each with 6 points, must have clinched the religious connection in Adam's mind. The head was something like a human's, albeit with an ungulate's ears, rather large eyes, and a slightly cat-like snout. Its mane and tail, though now mussed and tangled, seemed to have once been cut and dyed. The creature was entirely covered in short hairs, which had been dyed a soft purple, quite expertly, I thought, since not a single strand had been missed. A short spiraled horn, which reminded me of a narwhal, protruded from the simian forehead, completing the bizarre image. Holding my breath to avoid disturbing the sleeping creature, I peered at the horn as close as I dared. The foremost strands of mane had fallen away from it, and its base disappeared into the hairs of the coat, seemingly attached by no outside means. The bird-like wings, which connected to the body just behind the shoulders, were folded tight against the creature's sides. I thought they must be vestigial, as they were far too small to lift their owner. I stepped back and leaned against Adam's kitchen table. For a second I wonder why he had not seemed to share my sense of wonder at all this. Moreover, why had he left me to watch the creature, which I assumed he knew nothing more about than I did? What would I do if it woke up? Would it be hostile? Then I remembered who I was dealing with. To Adams, his behavior made sense. In his philosophy, there existed no shortage of creatures and spirits most people considered mythical. Besides, in his 24 years in this job, he had not missed giving a single weather report, and according to him, had never made an incorrect one. The arrival of an exotic animal, whose existence he had always known, was not reason enough to disrupt this. He was the best lighthouse keeper I had ever met, as well as the worst biblical literalist. "There are stories of dragons in almost every major culture," he had once said grandly. "The idea for them had to have come from something from the earliest days of civilization, or perhaps just before." "People found dinosaur bones," I said. They didn't know about fossilization back then, so they assumed the bones belonged to a living creature. At this he had grown silent, and I decided not to press the issue. Now, he no doubt considered the matter settled. If one mythical beast existed, there must be others. "Anybody ready?" That was the radio telephone in the corner of the kitchen. The circuit operator was asking which station wanted to give its weather report first. I hurried to turn the volume down, but was already too late. The corner of my eye caught a flicker of movement, and I jerked my head around just in time to see the creature's eyes open. I must have been the first thing it saw, for it made a sound like "Ah!" as it scrambled to its hooves and tried to back away, only to fall off of the couch and sprawl on the carpet.
What are you?
It said, as it awkwardly rose again. I could not believe my ears. When the creature's mouth moved, a woman's voice issued forth. I started backwards, too shocked to respond.
Who are you?
It said. Later, it occurred to me that this rephrasing was probably for the sake of politeness. For a long moment, the beast and I stared into one another's faces, each waiting for the other to make a move. It kept one hoof half raised, as if ready to fight or flee. I tried to think of something appropriate to say, but given the situation's absurdity, I doubt I could have broken the ice at the best of times, let alone 3:30 a.m. At last it lowered its hoof, and squinted its large eyes a bit.
Can you understand me?
Yes, I said reflexively.
Oh!
The creature smiled and brushed a few strands of mane from its face.
Well, at least something's gone right.
She gave a sort of four-legged bow.
I am Princess Twilight Sparkle.
Of course you are. I'm not sure why I said this. I suppose the name rounded out the whole ridiculous picture.
Huh?
Twilight said. I did not have a chance to explain myself, as at that moment the front door opened and Adams marched in. Twilight opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it and regarded him warily. He had always been more imposing than me, with his often grubby clothes, beard stubble, hard expression, and sometimes crusty demeanour. On more than one occasion I had found myself in the role of the good cop. Adams did not speak at first, but crossed the floor until he was a half-step closer to Twilight than me. An alarm sounded in my mind.
Hello,
Twilight said. Adams's only registration of surprise at this was an extra blink and a slight twitch of his upper body, but he must not have found it too strange since he responded right away. Are you a harbinger?
A what?
Harbinger. Of the end times. Twilight squinted one eye, raised the other's brow, tilted her head a bit, and said, He's wondering if you're here to warn us about the end of the world, I said. There was no sense trying to soften it. Though I had never taken Adams's apocalyptic ideas seriously, I now wondered how much he had actually been right about. Twilight's head tilting and eyebrow raising grew more acute, and she bit her lower lip a bit. I realized she was trying to think of a polite way to say no. She must not have known anything about Adam's vaunted end times, or she would have replied straight away. After a few seconds, Twilight's expression changed to that of someone desperately trying to make friends. A wide smile, betrayed by worried creases around the eyes and forehead.
Okay, I think you have me at a bit of a disadvantage.
She picked over the words as if she was afraid of setting us off.
Don't take this the wrong way, but I have no idea what you guys even are.
We're lighthouse keepers, Adams said.
You guys have lighthouses?
Twilight looked to the floor and tapped her head with a forehoof.
So, assuming we don't have the same word for two different things, you must have advanced moral or ethical standards.
She was thinking out loud. The strangeness of a mythical beast having such a human quirk was not lost on me. We know you're a unicorn, Adams said.
Alicorn,
Twilight said, cutting him off. What? The crease on Adam's brow meant he was in no mood to be corrected.
Winged unicorn.
Twilight flexed her somewhat ruffled wings. If Adams cared about the distraction, he didn't show it. I got up about 40 minutes ago and found you lying unconscious on my doorstep. You were protected from the rain by the house's overhanging roof, but were exposed to the cold. I carried you inside and went to fetch my assistant. Adams was not always so impersonal. This manner was the same he used when writing in the station's log. I wondered if he would have the sense to forego an entry on this incident when it was all over.
That's a relief.
Twilight's worried expression softened a bit.
I guess if you helped me, you,
She paused, abandoning her thought, whatever it had been, mid-sentence.
Well, thank you very much.
It's our job, Adams said. I wondered why God would create a man like Adams, who spoke to a purple unicorn-like creature the same way he addressed any of the other people he had helped over the years. You're lucky you ended up here, I said. This time of year, at this time of night, there isn't a soul for 50 miles. It was barely an exaggeration. Welcome to Cook Point, by the way.
You guys know about unicorns, even though I've never heard of...
Twilight looked back and forth between Adams and I.
How much do you know about unicorns, by the way?
You're the first either of us has met, Adams said. And not everyone believes you exist. While this was true, I wondered if Adams was deliberately withholding the true extent of the fact, or was simply being as brief as possible. I decided to interject before he could start talking biblically again. Before we go any further, I said, maybe you should tell us about how you got here, from the beginning.
Me first?
Our guest said.
Well, alright.
From outside came the whoosh of a mighty gust, and the large double-pane window that looked over the Vargas Bay creaked around the edges. Nothing was now visible in that direction, except the orange light from the boathouse down the hill. Twilight looked out the window and shivered a little. I imagined the scene must have been unnerving to her, as she still had no idea what our world looked like during the day. She turned back to us, got up on the couch, and sat upright, cat-like. With a calming breath, she began.
I am Princess Twilight Sparkle, the most favored student of Princess Celestia, one of the 2 diarchs of Equestria.
She paused, regarded our faces, and frowned at what she saw there.
For just over 3 years, I've been specializing in friendship-based magic.
Twilight flinched as Adams crossed his arms, and his frown deepened.
But that's not what brought me here. A long time ago, there lived a unicorn named Starswell the Bearded. He was a genius, centuries ahead of his time. He invented or dramatically expanded disciplines like amniomorphics, weather control, and teleportation. In the big National Archive in Canterlot, that's our capital city, there's an entire wing dedicated to his work. A few months ago, I was given instructions for a spell that Starswell had left unfinished. Using modern magic, I was able to complete it. This week, I got some personal time, so I decided to spend it looking into Starswell's more obscure works. I soon found out there were more spells he had left unfinished, several in fact. And since I'd gained so much more powerful magic by completing one, I decided to try and finish these as well. I guess I should have asked Princess Celestia for advice first. I thought this one spell was supposed to allow me to walk through walls, but...
She looked out the window again, probably hoping for any sign of dawn.
Now I realize the instructions referred to the walls of reality. Writings in Old Equus are sometimes weird that way. The first time I tried this, I messed the spell up, and it wasn't easy to set things right. This time it worked too well, and when I realized what was going on, it was too dangerous to stop the casting. It was one of the most strenuous things I've ever done, and...
She raised a hoof to her muzzle.
Just a minute.
She turned towards the nearby coffee table. It was bare, except for one of Adam's Bibles, a soft-cover King James printed on thin paper. Twilight fixed her gaze on it, licked her lips, and gritted her teeth. For the second time that day, I could not believe my senses. There was a sound I had never heard before, which I can only describe as a shimmering in my ears. A wavering magenta glow surrounded both Twilight's horn and the book on the table. As she concentrated, the book lifted off, pulled upwards as if by a magician's string. In less than a second, Adams crossed the floor and seized the book from the air. He glared at Twilight, his eyes sparks of hellfire.
Sorry!
Twilight cringed and took a few steps backward, nearly falling off the couch's end.
I didn't mean any harm. I've always liked books. I just wanted to see if my magic was coming back.
For a moment, I wondered why a creature with such extraordinary powers would be afraid of a human. But then, if she had never met anyone like us before, she had no idea of what we were capable of. Her shoulder only reached my waist, and difference in stature must have been very intimidating. Adams backed off, holding the Bible away from Twilight, as if she might attack it. I suppressed a sigh of relief. Just a misunderstanding, I said, risking more trouble. You were casting the spell, and then what?
Well,
said Twilight, still keeping one eye on Adams.
Just as I broke through, I must have blacked out from the unexpected strain. You know the rest.
She regained a bit of her composure, standing to her full diminutive height.
So here I am, in an alien world. Or, I'm in your world, so I guess I'm the alien.
There was a brief silence as we all considered this. Can you get back the same way? I said at last.
Actually, it might be easier since I'm familiar with where I'm going, and I've already had the nasty surprises. But...
For the third time, Twilight looked out the window in vain.
Not in this weather. It needs to be clear and calm. Something to do with the electromagnetic status of the atmosphere.
You might be in luck, I said. Every year around this time we get a period of clear, calm weather, and it's due any day now. Forecast calls for it, Adams said. He sounded less than pleased. I suppose he did not want the living proof to leave us so soon. I did not know whether we should ask our guest to stay, but doubted we could prevent her from leaving if she wanted to.
Listen, I was wondering,
Twilight said.
Earlier you said not everyone believed in unicorns?
As far as most people know, they're mythical, I said. Now I was using weasel words too. I neglected to tell her that most people meant everyone except Adams, and now me.
That's really incredible.
Twilight put a hoof to her temple.
It's kind of funny, really. I always thought alternate realities were just speculation, but here I am. And I guess there's no way of anticipating what you'll find in a completely different universe. I mean, there are books and lighthouses, but no unicorns or alicorns. And I guess there are no Pegasi or Earth ponies or, dragons here either, huh?
What do you know about dragons? Adam's interjection seemed to catch Twilight off guard, and she winced a little at the edge in his voice.
Well, I might have known a few.
She again picked her words carefully.
That's not a problem, I hope.
I got the feeling I was watching someone unknowingly commit suicide. There was no way Adams would look at the facts without certain prejudices. I couldn't remember what the scriptures said about dragons, but I knew Adam's opinion. They were evil creatures. We have some duties to take care of, Adams said. Make yourself comfortable. We'll be back. He motioned for me to follow him and marched out the front door, a little more quickly than usual. Excuse us for a moment, please, Twilight, I said, and hurried after him. A moment later, Adams and I stood in one of the outbuildings, surrounded by various Coast Guard necessities, anemometer, radio telephone, tool chest, the esoteric machines that made the microwave emitter work, and so forth. Adams peered out the window toward his house and turned to me. I don't believe a word, he said, still gripping the soft-cover Bible in one hand, white-knuckled, as though he was afraid of it being torn from him. There was only one chair in the room, and I claimed it in preparation for whatever he said next. Adams continued. Her story doesn't add up. It doesn't explain why she speaks our language, and I don't believe God would make other Earths. Though nowhere near as biblical as him, I was quite capable of approaching him as such. Sure he would have, I said. Didn't you ever read C.S. Lewis? She uses magic. Well, what do you expect? I mean, this isn't some harmless Harry Potter stuff, he said. Real magic is a tool of Satan's followers. Oh, Christ. I was afraid of this. Listen, I said. Maybe this is a test. Maybe she's like one of those angels who went to see if there were any good people in Sodom and Gomorrah. Angels have never taken that shape, Adams said. Well, I said, angels' true forms are terrifying, so maybe this one needed a way to show us she was something higher than human without scaring us. Either that, or her story is true. My avid reading meant that I had not come to this debate unarmed, but could I make him see reason? There is a third possibility, Adams said. He looked out the window again. I decided to appeal to his professionalism. Well, we sure as hell can't call the brass about this. They'd assume we had cabin fever or something. Adams said nothing, but scrunched up his face in concentration. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. Look, I said. If she was here to do something unpleasant, she would have done it by now. Remember why we took this job. We're supposed to help every person who needs it. It's not a person, Adams said. Well, she talks like one. And did you see how scared she was? Adams, hard-faced, stared at the ground. I pressed the advantage I hoped I had. And if this is a test from the Almighty, imagine what will happen to us if we fail. Come to think of it, I know the Bible mentions unicorns, but do you remember exactly what it says? Because I don't. Adams opened the book and began to leaf through it. I have to check this out. Go make sure it doesn't try something. Outside, the wind and rain had slackened a bit, and I mentally prayed the sky would clear by the time the sun rose. Chapter 2. When I returned to Adam's house, I found Twilight in front of the two full bookshelves on the far side of the main room. Her eyes scanned the spines methodically, and when I got close, I saw, or I thought I saw, a speck of drool on her lower lip. She raised a hoof at the Icelandic sagas, stopped just short of touching the first two volumes, and pulled away. I think you can look at those books, I said. Just avoid the ones with the crosses on them. She turned to me.
Why are they special?
Her tone was earnest, not flippant. Good question, I said. I like reading it sometimes. I have a copy myself. Some people, well, they're touchy about it. It would take a long time to explain. She turned back to the shelf.
Does it have something to do with him having more than one copy?
Sort of. It's a very old book with different translations. As I said this, a quiet inkling entered the back of my head, but when I turned my mind's eye upon it, it vanished like a match flame before a gust.
What's up?
Twilight must have noticed my contemplative expression. Nothing. I was just wondering. You can read our language, can't you? As well as speak it.
Actually, she said, I was wondering how you were speaking my language.
She tapped her head with one hoof, her face a picture of intense concentration.
It may have something to do with the spell I cast. That can happen with certain complicated magics that aren't properly documented. Your friend,
Adams, I said.
Adams, he was nearby when the magic gate opened.
She began pacing back and forth, again thinking out loud.
Could the spell have copied his linguistic knowledge into my brain? Was that one reason it took so much energy all of a sudden? It would make sense to include something like that. It wouldn't be good to drop into a completely unfamiliar place not knowing the language. Starswell, you really are a genius! But then, why didn't Adams notice when that happened? Because he was asleep, of course. He said he found me right after waking up. Yes, that makes sense.
Listen, I said. About him.
Yes?
She must have sensed the unease in my voice, for a little crease of worry appeared on her brow. I stepped away from Twilight and lowered myself into Adam's easy chair to make my appearance less threatening. Something you should know. He's afraid of you. Twilight bit her lower lip.
That book says something about unicorns, doesn't it?
It wasn't a question. And dragons, I said. Among other things. She looked at the bookshelf again.
What exactly does it say?
All I remember is, dragons are evil. I leaned forward. And you've actually met them? I couldn't stop an undertone of wonder from creeping into my voice. She nodded.
Guess I should have kept quiet. I should leave as soon as I can. I've offended him and, well...
She trailed off. You're as scared of him as he is of you.
Does that help?
I don't think he'd believe you if you told him. Twilight sat back on her haunches and her ears drooped.
I guess I can't be angry with him, she said. I've known a lot of people who get ideas in their head and won't be rational or reasonable about them, and someone with a book collection can't be all bad.
You and him would get along, you know, I said, if you love literature as much as you seem to. This was true, and I felt a little pang of sadness about it. Adams did not have many friends. The creak and slam of a screen door came from outside the kitchen. Adams marched into the room. 2 pairs of eyes followed him. He ignored us. He walked to the counter drawers, opened one, and withdrew a long knife. The kitchen's fluorescent light glinted off its edge. He turned to the refrigerator, opened it, and withdrew a bag of carrots. He then put a handful of them on a cutting board and began chopping them into large chunks. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. Adams put the carrot sticks on a plate and placed it on the kitchen table, along with a bowl of water. He turned and stalked down to the basement, the entrance to which was between the kitchen and the foyer. There was a pregnant pause. Twilight rose and walked to the table. I guess this is a good sign, I said, following her. She nodded, and picked up one of the sticks with the same weird telekinetic ability she had used before. Adams had not peeled the carrots, but if this bothered Twilight, she did not show it.
Even so,
she said between bites,
I still think I should leave as soon as I can. It's really too bad, but if I don't know anything about the people here, and they seem to already know some things about unicorns, and they've made their minds up...
She levitated the bowl and sipped at it, like a human would from a cup. But we didn't already know, I thought. Nothing in the story Twilight had told, nor in the way she had spoken or acted, matched any mythology I'd read about. In fact, in a flash of insight, the inkling that had tickled the back of my mind burst into my consciousness. Excuse me, Twilight. I rose and hurried to the room where Adams kept the laptop he used for correspondence. She's not biblical. What? Here, look. I had found Adams sitting at the basement workbench, flipping back and forth between pages in the Bible and reading them by the glow of a troubled light. Now, I held up the laptop and pointed to one paragraph in particular. Right here. The King James translation was wrong. The Hebrew word was rium, which translates to oroch. That was a subspecies of large cattle. Adams said nothing but stared at the screen, his eyes flitting across the paragraph once, twice, 3 times. The corners of his mouth turned down. Despite everything, I felt a little sorry for him. Well, he said at least, she's something. There was no positive inflection in his words. I decided to press the logical conclusion. So, there's no reason for any unpleasant behaviour? Never said there was. His voice had a grouchy undertone, as if he was annoyed at having to explain the obvious. The book on the bench still lay open, and he turned back to it and resumed leafing through. I think I'll let her stay in my house, I said, until she can leave. Adams looked out the basement's small ground-level window. Weather's still rough. Twilight and I stepped into the storm, and out of habit I made to lean into the wind, but there was another flash of magenta, and I found myself inside a transparent, luminous sphere that deflected the wind and rain. Bemused, I stared for a moment at the drops running down the field's outer edge, then looked at Twilight, whose horn again glowed. She smiled a little at my perplexed expression, and gestured with a foreleg.
Shall we?
The station doesn't have a spare dwelling, I said as we walked, but these houses were built for families, so there's plenty of room. I keep a cot and some sheets handy in case we need to put someone up for a while.
Thank you very much,
she said.
Hey, what's in there?
From an outbuilding close to my house there came a constant low rumbling. The engine room, I said.
What kind of engines?
Diesel.
Never heard of it.
She pointed her snout at the building.
May I see them?
You'd have to get the okay from Adams, I said. Twilight did not press the issue. As we entered my basement's door, Twilight lowered the weather shield bit by bit, like someone folding an umbrella while bringing it indoors. Inside, she looked to and fro at the gear and various junk arranged around the walls and under the stairs. Tools, workbenches, scrap timber, flotsam and beaches and so on.
That's interesting,
she said.
You have a lot of the same tools we do.
She put a hoof on a sledgehammer leaning against the near wall.
Yours are bigger, though.
Are you cold? It had only just occurred to me.
Just a little,
she said, turning to me.
Why?
The spare clothes won't fit you, but I'm guessing your people normally go naked. Twilight cocked an eyebrow.
Is that unusual here?
For a moment I considered how to answer this. We always wear clothes, I said, except when bathing or doing things clothes get in the way of. I had never been comfortable talking about such matters. I started up the stairs and motioned for her to follow me. My house's floor plan was very much like Adam's, but since mine was built on a small hill and was not quite as deep set into the ground, my main floor afforded an excellent view of the land and sea around Cook Point. But at the moment, the only clear images were the rain pelting the windows and the beams from the light tower as they circled around and around through the early morning darkness. Twilight's eyes brightened when she saw the nearly full bookshelf next to the largest window, and the sea charts that covered much of the walls. She turned to me with an expression that implicitly said,
Can I please?
Help yourself, I said. She trotted to the shelf and eyed the selection like a starving man given a menu.
I guess it makes sense that lighthouse keepers would have personal libraries.
Out here, the mind stagnates without them, I said. A hardcover volume glowed magenta and floated down towards my guest. To Kill a Mockingbird, I said. Good choice. Adams gave me that when he was done with it. Mockingbird still hovered next to Twilight's head as she turned to respond.
He's not really as mean as he acts, is he?
Not once you get to know him, I said. He just has a few hang-ups. At that moment, exhaustion caught up to me without warning, and I put a hand on the doorway to steady myself. Listen. I bet you're tired, and my shift doesn't start until noon. I'll set up the cot, we'll both get some sleep, and we'll sort everything out during the day.
Great, Twilight said. What a relief. I was afraid you didn't even have daylight in this part of the world.
I chuckled a bit at this as I made my way to the spare room. In the back of my mind, I wondered if my visitor was a dream or hallucination that would vanish by dawn. In a few minutes, the accommodations were in order, and I bade Twilight a good rest. She put a forehoof on the cot, then paused and turned to me.
Hey,
she said.
There's no tactful way to ask this, but what do you call yourselves? Your species, I mean.
Humans, I said.
Humans.
She rolled the word around in her mouth.
Thanks. That was driving me crazy.
Despite my exhaustion, I found myself wide awake when I reached my own bed in the room across the hall. I switched on the reading lamp on the bedside table. There were 6 books on that table, and my hand happened to fall upon the large one with the cross on the cover. I cracked it at a random page, and read the first lines my eyes found. And I heard, as it were the noise of thunder, one of the 4 beasts saying, Come and see. And I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went forth conquering, and to conquer. I closed it. I switched off the lamp. I lay awake in the dark, and turned the last few hours' events over in my head. It was almost too much to comprehend. In a short span of time, everything I knew had been turned inside out, and I could not decide whether to mourn the simpler past, or look forward to whatever the future would hold. For better or worse, it would be interesting. In the meantime, I had to wait, and that was the worst part of it all. I doubted things could truly go back to the way they had been, but I did not know enough to be certain. My visitor had given me no logical reason to fear her, but in the dark, alone with my thoughts, I found myself wishing there was a lock on my bedroom door.